Hey there, Jamie with Brazelton Realty here. Are you having trouble getting your offer accepted in this insane market that we're having? If you are, I'm going to give us eight tips on how you may be able to make your offers more appealing and be more successful at getting property under contract. And if you're new to this channel, you love real estate or you live in the area and you want to just keep apprised of what's going on in the real estate world, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification to be notified next time I post a video. All right, so you're pulling your hair out trying to get your offer accepted and you're just not having luck. Well, I don't know if it makes you feel any better, but you're not alone. There's lots of people in this position right now. So I'm gonna give us some tips that we can be thinking about to make our offers more competitive. Now, this is not all inclusive. There's a lot more tips that we could give, but these are just some tips that I have used and found to be successful. So the first tip that I'm going to mention is if you are a VA buyer, right? Either somebody in your family that's on the loan is a veteran. These are awesome loans, right? I'm not going to say that they're not, but we're having trouble getting them accepted, mostly because there's a lot of additional hoops and some additional expense on the seller's side to sign a VA contract. So sometimes they are more difficult to get to the finish line. That is one of the reasons why we see a lot of buyers not being as successful putting in VA offers. So you may actually talk to your lender and see what it would look like to get you into a conventional financing, if that's possible. And the same goes for FHA. Typically with FHA, if you're an FHA buyer, you have to be an FHA buyer because of your credit or the lack of down payment. But do everything you can to get yourself in a conventional loan. That will help your success immensely. Step number 2 is everybody is offering over asking price, right? That's almost a standard right now. But not everybody can put money above and beyond the appraised value. We call this an appraisal gap. So think about this, putting less money down on your loan and putting more money into paying above what it's going to appraise for. I'll give you an example. We're just getting ready to close on a house this next week, and it's gonna close at $375, but we ended up having to pay $7,000 above the appraised value to purchase the property. So it only appraised for $368. Now I know in that same neighborhood, there's another house that's getting bought with cash, same exact house, actually a little older, but other than that, everything's the same, and it's gonna close for $393 with cash, with no appraisal. So it will get used as a comp at that $393 process or $393 price point. Now the reason I bring this up is even though that $375,000 house they're buying it above what the appraiser says is market value. You give it 2 weeks, and if you were to have another appraisal done after that $393 property closed, then their house would be actually worth more than $375. So I know it's counterintuitive. I know it's so frustrating to offer more than asking price and then guarantee that you're gonna pay more than the house is worth or more than the appraiser thinks it's worth. I know that's frustrating and people don't like doing that, but the housing market is going up at such a fast rate. Your values are actually going to be catching up pretty soon. So this is something that a lot of people are already doing. And if you're not putting in appraisal gaps, quite honestly, you're probably gonna really struggle getting a property under contract. All right, so tip number 3, offer to buy the property as is. Now I know within our contracts, technically we are buying the property as is, but what I mean by this is you're telling the seller, we're not gonna ask you to fix anything. Now there's a few different ways we can do this. One of the most risky ways, but we are seeing it a lot, especially with newer houses that aren't going to have as many issues is people are waiving the inspection altogether. They're saying we're not even going to get an inspection. Now you can do that. It depends on the property, depends on the condition, depends on the age, depends on a lot of things. Definitely rely on your real estate agent to help you navigate that. I don't usually recommend that because it is pretty risky, and we're always trying to mitigate that risk as much as possible. The other thing we can do is you can put in a clause in the additional provisions that say we're only going to look at the house or do the inspection just to determine if we want to buy the property or not. We're not going to ask for anything. So you put that in the additional provisions, and then in the dates and deadlines, there's a section for inspection objections and an inspection resolution. You just remove those, so the only date you have left is inspection termination date. What this tells the seller is that you are not going to ask for anything. You're only determining the major components of the house and whether you want to continue with the purchase or not. That also being said, it is a little bit risky because the seller knows that you don't have to give an explanation to why you terminate. So the seller is taking a little bit of a risk, and they don't like that. So that's why a lot of people are just waiving the thing altogether. Again, I do think that's a bit risky. All right, my tip number 4 is try to close quickly. Now what this means is you have to have all your paperwork to that lender before you write the offer. Have everything you can have done before, that way that lender can move faster. And in Northern Colorado, our appraisers are really pretty quick. So we are able to get property closed in under 30 days. So I would recommend doing everything you can to be able to close quickly, because depending on that property, if it's vacant, being able to close really quick is advantageous to the seller, and it will save them some money. The other thing this allows you to do is it may allow you to be more flexible on closing. Because remember, the sellers are people, and usually they're trying to move somewhere else as well, and they're worried about their next place and transitioning. If you can be as accommodating as possible to them with that closing date, and say down the road, maybe even adjust the closing date, if they need to move it around because of their new property, tell them that you're going to do that and you're going to work with them. Be as flexible as you possibly can, but also give them the freedom to close quick. All right, so tip number 5, and that is increase the earnest money amount. Now this is not necessarily a benefit for the seller, because chances are the seller won't get that earnest money, but it's telling the seller, hey, you know what? I'm willing to put a little bit more skin in the game because I really want to see that property. It's gonna make them feel better because they're gonna feel like you're a more dedicated buyer and more committed buyer than maybe some of the other ones. Now again, chances are they're not going to get that earnest money, but you as a buyer, you have to have that earnest money available because it's going to get sent to title, and they are going to hold that money there, typically at title, until that property closes. Tip number 6 in our list. Now this tip is a little bit more controversial, and it is writing a love letter. Now what's a love letter? It's a buyer or a buyer's family writing a letter to the sellers, introducing themselves and telling them how much they love the house, telling them that they would love to purchase that house and all the like. Now, it is very effective. I have no doubt in my mind that a lot of times they are very, very effective, but I've also seen them backfire because you have to disclose something when you write that letter. And if you disclose something that the sellers are adverse to, they may not pick you because of that letter. The other thing that personally I do when I'm a listing agent is I specify no love letters. Why do I do that? Well, one, it plays with the emotions of the seller, which is never, in my opinion, a good thing for a listing agent. But then secondly, and most importantly, it also almost inevitably makes it impossible for the seller to make a decision that does not violate fair housing. Fair housing requires us to not discriminate against all these protected classes. And when you're divulging information to that seller, the seller gets stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if they choose you because of it, then they're in trouble because they actually discriminated against or for you because of that, right? And it goes both ways. But if they don't choose you, then they're also in trouble. So it's better for a seller not to see those. And that's why I don't like presenting those, and I will actually show in my listings that I don't want love letters, and I explain that to my sellers. But there's still a lot of listing agents that do. So it may be a tool that could be effective for you. Now we're on to number 7 on the tips on getting your offer accepted, and that is waiving your appraisal. Now this one, again, can be very risky, because what you're telling the seller is you're saying, I don't care what the appraisal comes back, I'm gonna buy the property. Now, a lot of times, if you're putting down a lot of cash, depending on the property, a lot of times lenders don't even require an appraisal. And so that's advantageous for you because you think you're gonna buy it at that price point anyways. So you don't necessarily care what the appraisal comes in at. And it's a huge advantage to a seller not to have to worry about that appraisal coming in. Now, this is not something that everybody can do. If you're not coming to the table with a bunch of cash and you're not confident that you can make up the difference, then it's something you probably need to leave in there. Otherwise, you may have some major issues down the road. Now, tip number 8 on our list. This is the final one. It's a post-closing occupancy agreement. What does that mean? That means that you are telling the seller after closing, which typically meant that the buyer would be able to occupy their own property, they're saying, I'm going to let you guys stay in that property for a period of time in order to get you transitioned from the old property to the new property. This is also sometimes called a lease back. Sometimes you can lease back up to a couple months, depending on what loan program you have, because some loan programs require you to be the primary residence within a certain period of that loan closing. But it's advantageous sometimes just a few days for a seller, because that gives them time to get all their stuff packed and moved to their new property, so they don't have to get that done in a matter of an afternoon or evening. They can actually do that over a period of a few days, maybe even a few weeks. So it's a huge sigh of relief for a seller to have buyers that are willing to let them migrate to their next place. Before I finish, I want to address one tip that probably was very notably absent to a lot of people that have been doing this for a while, and that's an escalation clause. I'm going to say that you can use escalation clause. What that means is that you say, I'm going to buy the property at this price point, but if there's another offer that comes in higher than mine, I will beat it by, X number of dollars up until a certain price point. So to give you an example, let's say you're looking at a $365,000 house. You say, you know what, I will pay $375,000 for that house, but I will beat any competitive offer by $1,000 up to, let's say, $400,000. So if another one comes in at $395,000, then you can say, okay, I will beat that by $1,000, so it puts you at $396,000. Now, the reason I don't like these in this market is because it requires a counter proposal or an additional step for the seller to finalize that contract. And when I'm a listing agent and I'm looking at offers, and I have one for $395,000 and one for $375,000 with an escalation clause, and it's going to beat it by $1,000. Honestly, there's a lot of times that my sellers will accept the $395,000 because they just laid it all out. They put their best foot forward, and they're not playing games. They're not trying to get a lower price. They're saying, hey, we're just going to buy it for this. And so a lot of times I do see this backfire. It's great for buyers because a lot of times that buyer says, I'd really like to buy it for $375, but hey, if I can get it for that, great. But if I have to go more, then I will. But from a seller's perspective, it's not quite as solid. And so that's why I didn't put that tip in my list. It still has a valid place. It still has a use that you can utilize. Personally, I just don't usually recommend those, especially in this market, because you really need to just put your highest and best offer out right out of the gate and show that seller that you mean business and you want to get that house purchased.